Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Horner. Welcome to Horner's Corner. It's Thursday night. We do this once a week. This is episode 12, and I'm really delighted to say that I have a friend and former colleague, Jeremy Jojola, who is an investigative reporter with KUSA-TV in Denver. Jeremy, thank you very much for joining the program tonight.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you, Mark. I mean, we worked together a long time ago at KOB in Albuquerque, and gosh, how technology has changed since then, where I'm able to sit face to face with you virtually and talk with you. We didn't have that back then when we worked together back then.
No, and it's just continued to, snowball. After we worked together a little bit later in 2009, I don't know if you remember, but I interviewed you. In fact, you joined me while you were on a story in northern New Mexico. It was the Wayne Bent story.
Yes,
quote unquote cult leader. And you had the headset on and you gave me some updates from just inside or outside the courtroom, which I was very grateful for on beyond90seconds.com. And now here we are in 2021 and you're looking and doing great.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, this is, I've been thinking a lot about, I always think about journalism, and I always think about, the role of the press these days. I think about it all the time because, it's an inherent part of my life. But, as someone who started out in this industry back in, 2000, I started in 1999 was my first TV job. And I think about those early days, and that was back in the days when newsrooms did not have really email. There was no social media back then. And now it is just so pervasive. It has changed so much about the role of the press in our country. We used to, the legacy media had a monopoly on the news. People had to wait for the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock news. Now it's just everybody can be a news reporter if they want to. And we're competing with that. I mean, those of us who've been in this industry for a long time and who have managed to keep jobs as journalists are competing with all of that. And so that's changed our role, and that's changed our outlook on what we do as journalists.
Well, speaking of what we do as journalists, I'd like to just take a moment to read from your bio on the KUSA-TV website, which is 9news.com, if I'm not mistaken. Let me switch over to that view. And here we go. This should bring it up. All right. Are you seeing it there? All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I will point out this
serious.
This was published back in 2016 and updated in October of 2020. But Jeremy Jojola is an investigative reporter for 9 Wants to Know, 9 News' investigative unit in Denver, Colorado. Jeremy brings more than 20 years of journalism experience to the team. In 2020, Jeremy was honored with the Don Bolus Medal. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Okay, good. A national award from investigative reporters and editors for his bravery and coverage of extremist and white supremacy groups in Colorado. I'd like to touch on that briefly in terms of how it applies to your social media engagement in a moment, or may have or may not. His prior investigations have prompted state legislation in Colorado after he exposed at-risk adults abandoned and stranded in hospitals across the state. Jeremy's reporting on human trafficking and illicit massage parlors in the Denver metro area also led to the criminal indictment of multiple suspects in Colorado in 2020. Over his career, Jeremy has garnered 18 regional Emmys, a regional Edward R. Murrow Award, and the distinction of Colorado's Best Reporter by the Colorado Broadcasters Association. Prior to coming to Colorado in 2011, Jeremy worked as a reporter for KOB-TV in New Mexico, where his family has lived for generations, and he'll proudly tell you so. Jeremy is married to a teacher and recently became a father to a little girl. I think she's a few years old now, if I'm not mistaken.
She's a year and a half.
Oh, okay. In his spare time, Jeremy likes to barbecue and spend time with his dog, Rudy, and family. And then it mentions your contact information, your email address, and your Facebook page. So fantastic.
There it is.
There's Jeremy Jojola officially anyway, in terms of his work capacity. Congratulations on all of your professional success, Jeremy. Those are no small potatoes when it comes to the trophies and wall hangings, I guess, that you've collected.
Yeah. I remember I remember the first time I saw an Emmy statuette. That was actually at John Blake's apartment in Albuquerque. And John Blake is watching. I remember the first time I saw one. I was a young reporter. I was, I think, 22 years old. And the first time I saw one, I was like, man, I would love to win one of these someday. And I was so enthralled with it. And it's nice to win them. But I think the real stuff I'm really happy about is when my work can prompt legislation, or my work can prompt change in policy and actually help people and improve people. That's where the real good happens. That's what I'm really proud of.
Yeah, the ultimate thing is helping people thrive and doing good for the people. I love that. Well, one of the big changes, you mentioned so much change over the years in social media. Now, years ago, you could use social media, and I'm sure reporters still do, to help get information on someone you've just learned about that was involved with the big story of the day. You look for them on Facebook, you look for them Reddit, anywhere you can, to try and see what you can find about their thinking, in some cases, find pictures and so forth. So there is that tool side to it. But there's another side that I'd like to go down right here now in this particular episode. And that is journalists using social media, where you aren't just saying, here's a link to last night's story, or this is what I'm working on for tonight. You're doing a lot more than that. You're letting people, in a way, kind of know who you are oftentimes, which helps separate you from all the other choices that they have, mainstream and otherwise. We get some personality at times. And I don't think I'm going too far when I say sometimes we even hear points of view. In fact, that seems to be fairly common, not just among, quote, millennials, but older journalists too, who are prolific on social media. So that's what's on the front of my brain, Jeremy. You comfortable talking about this stuff?
Absolutely. I own it, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay, so I guess, I kind of characterize this episode as the benefits and pitfalls of using social media as a journalist. So what, in terms of putting yourself out there on Twitter, on Instagram, and other places in social, what are the benefits? Let's start there.
So I think there's a lot of benefits. Number one, I think my favorite benefit of it is I'm not constrained by a TV news report. A TV news report is so constrained by time, and it's expected by people who are watching the news to be a very cut and dry news report. On social media, it's a casual place. I can show who I am. I can show my process as a journalist. I can share, anecdotes, not only me as a journalist, but me as a guy, as a regular guy living in the world who pays taxes, who's worried about the things that many of us are worried about in society. I share my views a lot on stuff without treading into waters where I'm sharing my views on topics I cover. And I think people are looking for authenticity from journalists. They want honesty from journalists. They want journalists to be clear about where their positions are, or why they're covering certain stories, and their intent and the angles that they've taken in certain stories. And it's a great place for me to, have spirited debates with people who have been critical of my reports, or it's a great place for me to explain in more detail about why I said something in a certain way, or why I put an interview in a certain way, or how I frame the story. So I think there's a ton of benefits to social media. It is a double-edged sword. A lot of older journalists, conventional journalists, don't like it because they feel that journalists need to be absolutely removed and be stoic and be robots and not reveal any other points of view at all. But that's an ancient way of thinking. I think is out the door these days. People flock to reporters that they trust and like, and where they can learn from, where they can get some insight. And I engage a lot with my followers, with the people who follow me. I engage a lot with them, and I enjoy it because I love explaining my process. And I also like showing that I'm a human being. I think that's most important about social media for me, is that it gives me a chance to show that I'm just a guy. I'm not some suited up reporter. I'm a messy, sloppy guy. I make my mistakes. I have my faults, and I own them. and I talk about them online, and it's not something I shy away from. Yeah, I'm sure there's been times where I've probably shared a little bit too much, or some things, but I don't really regret my presence on social media. I never really have, and I own it, and it's me. I believe it's my authentic self.
So there are a lot of good arguments there for why to do it. And I love what you said about process. I remember even prior to social media, when consultants would come into a newsroom, they would preach process, that the viewer loves to see the process that you went through. If you went and try to get it, something through the Freedom of Information Act, show that. If you had to go knock on this door, show that. This whole thing about process. So really, you're just extending that storytelling away from the news slot to elaborate on process before and after the story even hits the air. But let me say something in defense, if I may, because I am an older person, of those ancient journalists who haven't changed with the times, I guess. And that is, I would frame it a different way. I wouldn't say it's about being, stoic, whatever. It was kind of ingrained, I think, in older journalists that we're to be a window to a story and not a door, that we're to strive that, well, first of all, that true objectivity is not possible, but we should strive to be as fair as possible to all sides. I didn't say both sides, because sometimes there's more than two. So to all sides. And really our conviction, our point of view on the issue, it's best that people are left wondering what that might be. So when I frame it that way, does that scrub your thought, your thinking in any, does it change it at all or whatever?
Well, I do think, there has been this long established tradition in journalism to do stories that are fair to all sides. And I think that is actually changing a lot, especially when we've, covered certain events and covered certain situations. For example, when I covered local white supremacy and hate groups and neo-Nazis, anytime I talk about those groups, I have people on social media asking me, okay, you're talking about local neo-Nazis and you're talking about white supremacy in Colorado. Why don't you talk about the left-wing groups? Why don't you talk about the other groups too, for balance? And I say this to them: I don't need to be fair to neo-Nazis. I don't need to be fair to white supremacists. I don't need to be fair to hateful groups, because they are hate groups. They don't deserve balance. It is un-American for me to be expected to be a balanced reporter when I'm talking about neo-Nazis or white supremacists, to share the other side of white supremacy and neo-Nazis. And what is that? I don't need to go down that road. I don't need to justify that. My stories about white supremacy were about white supremacy. And, I've covered the protests over the summer here in Denver, the George Floyd protests. And we've talked about groups here in Denver that were on the left that got arrested and charged for rioting and vandalism. And we've covered those cases, but people have a very, very different perception of what they're watching these days, because I think social media has really tribalized the news consumer. It has really changed the perspective, not of everybody, but I do think when people are watching the news, a lot of people are expecting the news to confirm their opinion. They're not looking to be challenged, and they're not looking to be, a lot of people who watch the news are not looking to be educated. A lot of people are coming forward to watch the news or to consume news to get facts that fit their personal narrative, to fit their worldview. And when those facts don't align with what they believe, they get angry at reporters like myself. And then they send bad emails and threatening messages. And so I would, when you frame it that way, I would say that was good thinking back in the day. I think it's changing though, because we have to report the facts. We can't be have a journalism that's both sideism, if you will.
Okay, Jeremy,
not all the time.
If a journalist, let's say a television journalist in Denver, Colorado, was offered the opportunity to do an exclusive prior to the May book, ratings book,
Yeah.
to have exclusive access to a neo-Nazi training camp of sorts in the woods outside of Denver. Is a journalist going to take that assignment? Is the news director going to push that you do that? Or are they going to stay away from it?
Well, I think it really depends on what the news value is. How big is this neo-Nazi camp? Is it recruiting people? Is it a threat to the public safety? Is it something that the immediate community surrounding this camp needs to be aware of? As I have covered, the white supremacy neo-Nazi groups here in Denver, we've had to weigh a lot of the coverage. There's been a lot of hate crimes and other incidents that fall into the hate crime category that we have not covered because we weigh, the news balance of this. If you do start reporting on these groups too much, and I'll just say this, a lot of these groups want the mainstream media acknowledgement. They want to be recognized in mainstream news reports. They want to be legitimized in mainstream news reports. And so we have to weigh that. But at the same time, we have to inform our community that hate crimes in Denver have spiked. Why have hate crimes in Denver have spiked? We have to inform the community that these groups are actively recruiting young men. These groups are organized. They have presidents, they have chapters, they have meetings. And these are groups that are actively out there growing and they're protesting. And some of these people have criminal records. And so we have to weigh what the public interest is in that versus sensationalizing a group and giving a group too much attention.
Okay, so let's talk about the pitfalls of social media, and we'll hang on to this narrative of the white supremacist neo-Nazi story that you covered or series. So you mentioned how highly organized these organizations can be, and they have probably an online tactical plan as well. And you are working as a reporter. You're out there on Twitter. I kind of got the sense as someone who follows you on Twitter, I want to say it was last year, that you were feeling the pressure. Maybe you weren't, or you were receiving what might be perceived as a lot of pressure from people linked to these groups. I don't know. There was a lot of negativity, it seemed, coming at you. And I think you even took a break. Was it related to that story or was it some other story? But I think you needed to step away.
Well, I had to step away because it got to the point where every time I would open up my Twitter feed, and there was a lot that I didn't share on Twitter about this and online. It got to the point where I would wake up in the morning, check the news feeds, and I would have about 3 to 4 different anonymous messages from people telling me to kill myself, threatening me and my family, telling me how much of a horrible person I am. And this went on every day for weeks. And the way Twitter was handling those accounts back then, I didn't think was good enough because there were some pretty clear threats coming at me and some pretty bad messages I was receiving, not only in the morning, but throughout the day. And I think my presence on there and me talking about those reports and me doing those stories, it made me a target. And that's fine. I mean, it comes with the territory, but it got to the point where I was like, I asked myself, is it worth it right now for me to be on the site? And before I left Twitter, before I took a hiatus, I made numerous substantial reports to Twitter about these abusive, harassing accounts. And Twitter was very slow to react, or they did not see any violations. One of the accounts was very bad. This person would have an account get banned on Twitter, and then they would create 3 or 4 more accounts as backup. And so when one would get banned, I'd get these nonstop messages. And then it got to the point where that person was harassing not only me, but they were following my followers and harassing them for following me. And so I felt my presence on there was not only, it was affecting my mental health, but it was also affecting other people. And I said, you know what? I don't think Twitter's a good place right now. It's not doing a very good job of cleaning this, up. And I took a break. I stopped, and it was an indefinite break. then I came back after I saw that Twitter started cracking down on a lot of hateful groups. Then I checked some of the accounts that were some of the worst accounts that were, doing all of this, and they were suspended indefinitely. And so I came back, and now it's a much more cleaner place. It's a much more less hateful, vitriolic place. I mean, it still has its toxicity to it, but it doesn't have that fertile ground where someone can create account after account after account after account just to harass. But I mean, it still happens. I mean, just the other day, I had a guy who created a Twitter account using my image, and he made 3 or 4 of these accounts and was sending me nasty messages over Twitter. And he got banned within about 30 minutes after me filing a report. Prior to that, it took Twitter even just days to respond to one of my, my complaints. So, yeah, that's what happened there.
Good, thank you. I appreciate your sharing that. You said at the top that you own it and you'll talk about it, and I really appreciate your candidness and your transparency here. And because we're fighting daylight in Denver, Colorado,
I'm gonna turn on my front porch real quick, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Step away. Let me turn on my light real quick.
Okay.
There you go. This might help a little bit.
We'll take every little bit of light.
Does that
help helps a little bit. Yeah. Maybe you want to face it.
Actually light.
Yeah.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you. So you mentioned your family, and I don't know about you, and I suspect it was the same, but once you become a father, that shines a different light on context. And so all of this was going on with just that one story or series of stories alone. Reporters, journalists on social, it can be, we can find out about, your personality and maybe even how you feel on issues, but it's a whole other level, I think, or deeper end of the pool when you start introducing family, when you start showing kids. I don't know that you do that on Twitter. Perhaps you do on Instagram, and I think your Instagram is public. So that you can't live in fear. You can't let these people kind of dictate these imaginary fences that you might be tempted to put up around you. However, there's probably some level of reasonable sensibility regarding awareness and where you don't want to go. How do you wrestle with that? And has that tugged at you? I know, even being a non-journalist these days, my wife will bring up issues at times.
Yeah. For example, one of the Proud Boys, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys are a national extremist right-wing group. They have a lot of followers, and they have their share of followers here in Colorado. I posted, for example, a picture of me and my daughter in front of a restaurant, and this is last year, and that Proud Boy took that image on Twitter and used it to harass me. And for me, that was really one of the points where I was like, I think I'm going to start getting off this site. I don't really share my family on Twitter too much. If I do share a photo of my daughter, it's not with her face. It's something at a distance. I mean, I being a father is a big part of my life. I share that on Twitter. I share funny anecdotes about that. But I don't really share too much of my family online. On Twitter, on Instagram, it's different because Instagram is more of it's funny how social media platforms are so different. Instagram is so much more friendlier. It's not as toxic. Twitter is just this depressive, lake sometimes. And people are very skeptical and cynical. But at the same time, there's smart people on Twitter who want news. Facebook is very, very different. They have their different crowds. It depends on what you're clicking on and what groups you're a part of, and what communities you're on Facebook. So it depends on the social media platform. But with Instagram, I'll share more family photos on there, and because I don't get the trolls on there as much like I do on Twitter.
One of the other potential pitfalls that I see, it used to be that when you were in a studio or live in the field, or live in the newsroom, and the newscast was in progress, or even prior to the newscast, if you were wearing a microphone and in position to go live, you had to treat every moment as if your mic was hot, because you wouldn't want to be caught saying or doing something where you thought you were off air, and somehow that got out over the air, right? You've seen it happen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Now
hot mics.
Yeah, hot mics. So now with social media, people, I remember, it's gone now, but speaking of Twitter, it had for a period of the better part of 6 years, Periscope. And I remember when Periscope came out, there was this thing where a lot of anchors around the country would have their phones propped up with their iPads on the news desk, and they would be scoping, streaming live on Periscope while they were anchoring. So that seemed to introduce a whole new level of the hot mic consideration. That meant the floor crew and anybody rushing in to hand off a script or what have you, everybody had to be aware of the potential hot mic to include during commercial breaks or just before, a newscast. When you're out on the field, maybe you're at a protest or a demonstration, you may decide to go live on Facebook or to go live on Twitter. If you have crew members around you associated with your employer, your news station, they should probably have a heads up that you're about to do that in case they need something in the truck because they're editing something. They didn't see a time code and they're frustrated and they drop an F-bomb running up to you. Where's that time code? I've only got 3 minutes. Someone's in my ear. So that's a whole new dynamic and consideration too. And you have to live with that. If it goes out over Facebook or if it goes out, on social, it can go viral in no time and put you in a really uncomfortable place, especially depending on the story that you're covering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to turn on more porch lights here, Mark. I'm sorry.
You can turn and face the porch light too.
I don't want to look like Dracula in your stream here. There we go. Yeah,
we should call it Horner's Corner after hours in the dark.
I don't know if that helps out a little bit.
Maybe if you turned. What about if you turned around and faced that light?
Yeah, there you go. How's this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lighter background, but the light itself, your porch light's on you. That's better. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I didn't anticipate it to get this dark. I do think, as long as you're honest and you're truthful, when there's a live stream, you're honest and you're truthful and you're true to, and as long as you're aware that you're live streaming and what you're saying, you don't have to worry about it. I think if you're honest and you still kind of play that role as a journalist, that you don't, say anything too much about your viewpoints or where you stand on a certain story, I think you're fine. I think as long as you're, sharing honest observations, interesting observations about what you're seeing or viewing. I remember when I was covering the George Floyd protests here in Denver, it was a really intense protest. I mean, it was the first time I felt what tear gas felt like. And we were nonstop streaming to the station and online. I mean, nonstop. I mean, our cameras were constantly. And so we had to be careful about, not only what we were saying and the things that we were saying, but I mean, we had to constantly give disclaimers on air, from protesters who were saying a lot of vulgar words around us. And, I remember when I was going live, I constantly had to warn viewers, listen, you may hear things and see things that we can't control, as we're covering a protest. So I think, it's a double-edged sword. I think live streaming is good, just as long as the person who is handling the live stream still acts within the realm, an appropriate realm as a journalist.
It used to be that prior to the, social, there would be the proverbial 7-second delay on for example, the high-speed chase, and you're following it with a helicopter. And just in case something really ugly happened, that 7-second delay, or it could also save you from, expletives, things like that. But and there were FCC concerns, I'm sure. But when you're on Facebook, it's a looser game, I suppose, too. And I think there's more forgiveness and understanding in culture. What's culture, widely acceptable changes as well. I wanted to take a look, Jeremy, and we've gone 29 minutes now. And told you I'd try to keep it to a half an hour. So if you don't mind, I'd like to share your Twitter feed and just take a look at it.
Yeah.
And let's see here. Well, bring up that just a moment. I got to switch sources. Okay, and over here, there we go. So here's Jeremy's Twitter feed. He's at Jeremy Jojola. So right off the top here, and I haven't refreshed this, so maybe you've tweeted just before going on there. But no, you were responding, and I'll call this a little bit of pizzazz and personality. A little feisty here. So somebody named Johnny Walker Dread tweeted, I watched it. What's the problem? Felony warrant with a suspect who resists arrest. All he had to do was roll over and let them cuff him, and none of this would have happened. And you wrote in your tweet, "All rise. Twitter court is now in session. Our first expert witness is an anonymous bro. Please proceed, sir," with a capital S.
My tweets are horrible. I will be the first to admit it. I am, but I have fun on there. That's my personality. That's who I am. And I've had people who say, who told me they don't like the way I tweet. But I think for the most part, most of my followers really enjoy my content. They like what I put out there. I'm true to my perspectives on what I'm covering. I don't, as an investigative reporter, it's a little bit different than the daily grind reporter, right? Those of us work at the investigative unit. We're covering pretty intense topics in the investigative unit, and so we're by our nature already skeptical. We're cynical. We're critical. And so that comes across on my Twitter feed. And, as an investigative reporter, it's my job to call out BS. It's my job to push back. It's my job to, uncover things and expose things. And it's also, I will say this, it's also my job to defend my work. And that's how I defend my work. I have a right as a journalist to defend my work. And I do it my way. And if some people don't like it, that's fine. They don't have to follow me. But
do you ever say something? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you ever say anything like, has there been a rare occasion perhaps where you said, you know what, that's a good point, I hadn't thought about it that way? Or...
I think so. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as people come at me in a civil approach, I am totally fine with listening to. I love different points of view, and I've learned a lot from other people's perspectives online. I consider myself an open person, but I think Twitter is one of those places where the spears are already out, the knife points are already out, and in that platform, you have to have it's a knife fight in there sometimes, and people will come out at me with insults right away, and if they're going to do that, I'm gonna push my shield back, and I think I have a right to, and I think it's appropriate for me to do. And some people don't like that. Some people feel that journalists should keep quiet and be punching bags. But I don't believe in that philosophy anymore. And when I am pushing back on critics and trolls online, it also gives me an opportunity to show my perspective. It's a vehicle for me to show where I'm coming from and my thought process on a report. So I when I do respond, I do know that not only is that person seeing my response, but I've got thousands of other people that are seeing my response to that person.
Two last questions, I think. One would be, is there value? Is there an expectation amongst hiring news directors in your social profile? Well, how many followers does she or he have? What platforms are they on? What are they on? I would think that if you're there, they're certainly going to take a look at what you're tweeting, for example. But is there a stock that factors in whether or not your value as a journalist? And are you, in a sense, your own brand?
I have heard of news directors these days. They have been looking at journalists and how many followers they have and their online presence. And I've heard of news directors taking a closer look at reporters who've been able to develop a following and who have been able to develop their own brand. When I'm online, I love being online. I mean, I love Twitter. I love interacting with viewers, and I love sharing my anecdotes. As a journalist, we're naturally, have short attention spans, which is why I think Twitter's so like a narcotic in a way, because you're constantly getting like these
endorphin rushes.
Yeah, endorphins. Yeah, I mean it's a legitimately addictive website, and I admit I've got a problem with Twitter. I have an addiction with it, but I love it, and I try to. I mean, there are times that I'm on there probably too much. I admit that. But I do think with journalism these days, people are online. That's where people are. And people want to know what their journalists, what their favorite journalists are doing, or they want to know how, if they see a big news report or a big story, where do people go? They're not waiting for 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or the 11 o'clock news to tell them what's happening. People are going to Twitter because they're seeing breaking news unfold, and they're going to follow their favorite journalist because their journalist is either out there in the field or their journalist has the contacts and has the community connections to bring forth information in real time. And that's what I do. And I think I've garnered, right now I have 20,000 followers on Twitter. A lot of them are bots. A lot of them are bad accounts, but I do think I do have a following of people who like to see not only my work life, but they also like to see like my personal life too. And I like sharing that.
Right. Well, we're burning through the last of daylight there in Denver, Colorado,
Yeah.
Jeremy.
I'm sorry it's so
no,
dark.
no. It's cool. I appreciate you even adjusting your chair and accommodating.
I didn't realize it was gonna be so dark.
Well, in fairness to you, you thought we were going to be on at 7 o'clock local time in Denver, and actually it was 8 o'clock when we started. And I had put the PST in the message for Pacific Standard Time. I should have outright told you, please be mindful that's 8 o'clock your time. So my bad there. I apologize. But what I wanted to ask you off the top of your head, well, time out. One last thing. If you're in the watching as an attendee, or you're on YouTube and you have a question, now's the time to get it in. And if you're on Zoom, put it in the Q&A rather than the chat. And I'll know that's something you'd like to hear Jeremy answer. And if you don't have any questions out there, that's fine too. But I just want to make sure I extend that opportunity to include your voice here. The question for you, Jeremy, is right off the top of your head, a tip came or a comment came or a picture came on social media, any social media platform, and it resulted in a story that you did. Has that happened?
All the time. Oh yeah, all the time. I think, we used to, back when I started as a reporter in El Paso back in 1999, to find news, you actually had to go down to the courthouse and dig through records and physically drive out and meet sources. And there's still a lot of that in journalism these days, but a lot of stuff just comes pouring at us now. I would say a vast majority of the stories that I do come from direct messages from people that have, that have followed me and see something out in the world, and they tell me about it. A lot of the investigations that I do have come from social media. Of course, we do our due diligence and verify everything before it gets to become a story. But yeah, I would say the vast majority of my stories come from our viewers and from people who follow me and interact with me online.
Great. Is there anything, Jeremy, before we wrap up? I was just checking the comments on YouTube. No questions. People are saying, good show, very impressive. Someone gave a peace sign. So there are people watching. We can confirm that. We had a comment in the Zoom chat, but not in the Q&A. I guess it was a comment that, I'll just throw it out there. This comes from Adam, AV Trainer is his handle. And what really qualifies as a quote unquote social media director in general. And if you were to hand off some of the management of your own media, I'm not sure in terms of what you mean by hand off some of the management of your own media. As that would be like as a viewer? I'm not sure what you mean. I know that viewers contribute a lot of photos and video.
They do.
And you know what? Back in the day, in Albuquerque, we'd pay a guy like he used to chase fires. His name was Joe Stone. He later got hired as a photographer by the Albuquerque Fire Department. We try and give him 25 or 50 bucks, but now there's really no expectation of payment on the ordinary, if you will, but it's filling news time, and news stations are monetizing that free contribution from their viewers on their websites, let alone the newscasts. So that's always struck me as a little strange.
Yeah, well, if there is actually good video, there's actually more people are becoming more savvy that they're able to license their stuff. So a lot of times when something does go viral, you actually have these licensing companies that will immediately latch on to a viral video, contact that person and say, hey, listen, we will pay you money right now, but you have to be exclusive with our licensing. If any news stations come to you, they have to come to us first. And then, of course, those licensing companies want hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars for a video, and that's fine. That's good. I mean, that's American capitalism at work. But yeah, I mean, yeah, and anytime viewers share stuff with us, we use it. We ask them for permission. And does each video or image rise to the threshold where we're going to pay somebody? No.
Gotcha. Jeremy, if people want to watch Jeremy Jojola at work doing investigative journalism, when and where can they find you?
Well, I've got actually 2 stories airing next week that I've been working really hard on. One of them, I'll give you a hint of what it is. On Tuesday on 9 News next week, I uncovered fraud. This is a story I've been working on for weeks. I uncovered $2 million worth of taxpayer fraud that was funneled through some fictitious businesses here in Colorado. This is the first time I'm talking about it. It's a story that's slated for Tuesday, where we've been editing all week. This is going to be, I feel it's a big story for me, because I was actually going through some data, some government data, and I found $2 million that went to a place where it shouldn't have gone.
So you're really thinking then that this could, you think this could lead to a long string of follow-ups, which would include court considerations, perhaps charges?
Yeah. I know of a federal agency that has taken interest in what we have found, and so there's going to be. I can pretty much expect some follow-ups. So
okay, and the second story.
The second story has to do. I don't want to give too much away, but it involves technology and COVID. And what happened with that technology during COVID that actually didn't work out too well. That's all I'll say about that.
Is that going to be on 9 News next week as well?
Yeah, that's going to be on 9 News next week. That's slated for Friday.
Okay, so Tuesday and Friday.
Tuesday and Friday. Yeah.
So can people watch live on air?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 9news.com.
So will you be on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll be at 9news.com on Tuesday night and then on Friday night. Yeah, right
Would
after
that
the
be?
Olympics.
Is that like 10 o'clock Mountain or?
Yeah, it'd be the 9 o'clock and the 10 o'clock news after the Olympics.
So that's what KUSA 9 News is going to be teasing heavily during the popular Olympics and all those eyeballs.
Yeah, very likely. I'm very excited about these stories. This $2 million case of fraud is something I've been working on for a long time. It has to do with taxpayer money. It's a lot of money, and it's something that we've been chasing down for a while. I'm biased. I think it's a fascinating story.
I can't wait. I'm going to watch them, Jeremy. That's fantastic. Maybe we'll embed them. Maybe we'll embed them if 9 News has an embed code we can add it to this post on beyond90seconds.com. Or we'll put the links too in the YouTube beneath the YouTube video once they're out. Anything else you want to add, my friend?
I think it's great to talk to you. I loved our discussion about this. I think, as me as a journalist, I've been doing this now for 20, 22 years. I've embraced social media. I know you did too. When you at your days at KOB, I actually followed your lead a lot, because you had your own website back then when you were a reporter, and I followed your lead. I was like, oh, Mark Horner's got his own website, and I remember Beyond 90 Seconds and how great that was, and you really embraced it. And you did such a good job, and I actually followed your lead in a lot of ways when it came to my social media presence. I do think, the public, still at its very core, as journalists, at the core, the most important roles that we have is holding government accountable. And the most important role that we have is informing the public, especially when there's a disaster or some sort of community incident that people really need to know about critically right away. And that's a belief that I hold very close to my heart. And I also believe in the First Amendment. I'm a steering member, committee member of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. We fight for journalists' rights all across this country. We file briefs in court, and challenging government, because every day government is getting more opaque. It is getting less transparent, and a big part of our jobs are not only informing our communities, pushing back on government, but also opening up government. That's a big role that we have to keep pushing on as journalists.
That's fantastic, Jeremy. There are so many great topics when it comes to journalism. And
I could talk all night for the next 6 hours.
Well, I could too, very easily. And there are some great topics out there, and I'd love to bring them up again at a later date. Let me just extend an open invitation. As long as I'm doing this, you're always welcome to come on. If you have a story or situation that you would like to discuss. Hey, you've got a venue here if you'd ever like to join it again. We don't have a whole lot of eyeballs, but we're trying to grow community here. Safe place, respectful place to share knowledge and points of view, right?
Absolutely, man. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Would you stick around for a couple just on the post show so I can thank you properly? Sure. And we'll go ahead and end the live stream here. But I want to thank everybody who watched this live stream. I also want to thank those of you who are watching the replay. If you'd like to help support this program, Horner's Corner, and the Beyond 90 Seconds social media effort to bring you content such as this, I recently did open up my Patreon account, and you can support me there at patreon.com/Beyond 90 Seconds. So there's an opportunity for you too. And so until next time, hopefully I'll be posting some videos on the YouTube channel, Beyond 90 Seconds, between now and next Thursday. But until then, take care, stay safe, and